in a business in that area, it suddenly feels like, well, I'm going to buy the sequencer from Roche, but I'm competing with Roche, and Roche is trying to displace me. I called the article "Everywhere All at Once," right? It's like, whoa, everywhere I look, all of a sudden there'll be Roche.
Roche probably doesn't have the greatest track record with these acquisitions within the NGS space. And one could say that maybe that was because things were moving too quickly in the past, and maybe a large organization is not the greatest in terms of enabling that type of innovation. Just looking at let's say foundation medicine,
different institutions are going to want to do things differently, is why I like Roche's strategy of having sort of a multi-pronged approach to trying to drive MRD, right? Which conceptually makes a ton of sense, right? It's just, some institutions, they want to do it in-house. Other institutions don't want anything to do with it. And then, worst case, you have a lot of places like Canada where they don't cover it, so it's out of pocket. So if you want it, you've got to send out of country to have these tests done. So I like that idea of sort of having the menu available for what makes sense in which jurisdiction, because they Hey everybody, I'm Kostas.
And I'm Lester, and welcome to another episode of What's with RWE. We're actually going to do things slightly different. Again, this episode, we're going to do a panel conversation, but it's just not me and Kostas. We actually brought in our friend, Alex Dickinson. As everyone knows, Alex is LinkedIn provocateur of LinkedIn, and he is now I would say even close to an influencer, LinkedIn influencer. So welcome to the episode, Alex.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here, guys.
Yeah, so this is something that's going to be a little bit of a mesh up between What's with RWE and Alex's podcast of Geonomics. So we'll see how things go. Give comments, likes below, and yeah, we'll see. So we're going to have a conversation around several topics that sprung up in the April timeframe. Things, of course, move very, very rapidly, so we're going to try to get to these as quickly as possible over time, and you let us know what you think. So maybe the first topic to kick things off, Alex and Kostas, is this couple of late announcements in April where OpenAI launches something called Rosalind. So for those of you who are not keeping up to date with the different LLMs, so Rosalind is almost their unique model around the life sciences. And then Anthropic, similar time frame, acquires a company called Coefficient Bio. This Coefficient Bio company has, in some ways, no product out yet. They're trying to make, let's say, a drug, right, or at least a platform that helps people develop better drugs. And they acquired this organization for $400 million. Well, I guess in this time in millions is not actually that much money anymore, right, in this world of trillions of dollars. So I guess my question for let's start with you, Alex, first, and then we'll go over to Kostas, is like, what's the deal here? Is this truly OpenAI and Anthropic trying to make a push into the life sciences because they believe that there's sufficient money involved here? Or is this more of in some ways, life science washing over potentially all the jobs that they're going to replace that they always talk about? Is this a way to make people feel better? Hey, we have to do this because we can save lives and we can cure diseases. Well, what's your take on this, Alex?
Lester, I thought I was a skeptic, but look at you. I don't think it's a washing thing. There's another one which is sort of on the Google side of things. I think just yesterday or a couple of days ago, Isomorphic Labs, which is Dennis Sablissis and who won the Nobel Prize, and Google, I guess, they raised $2 billion Series A funding. So they are definitively aiming to do drug discovery. And I think they've said they have a few targets they're investigating, maybe more than that. It's definitely a thing. What I can't work out is if it's a real thing. And I think I'm not unique in that and I think Kostas will have some opinions on this, is everyone knows that we want a much better way to discover drugs, drug markers, and everything else. So it's very natural to look at AI and go, well, maybe this is now the thing. And maybe it is, but I think it's too soon to say. There's a subgenre of it that interests me, which is that, large language models, the L in large language models stands for language. And pretty early on, it was recognized that even though we've been training these things on human languages, from their point of view, a language is a language. So feeding DNA into it, I mean, feeding anything with let's call it symbolic patterns into it, and using that to extract knowledge is super interesting. So there's been a few philanthropic efforts, and I'm thinking of Chan Zuckerberg in particular, of just going, hey, we're going to build a foundation model and we're going to train it on a lot of bio data of one form or another. That one kind of, how can I put it? And there's even been some companies, I can't remember the name, but there's commercial efforts. And maybe that one that OpenAI bought was an example of this. The mystery there is I'm not quite sure what it's for, right? It's everyone's like, that's a cool idea. Let's like feed a lot of stuff in. And then with a bit of luck, we'll be able to put in a pathway and it'll tell us how we might disable the pathway, I guess, or find a marker. Those models themselves could become discovery machines. But I think that's a really, really tall order. It might happen at some point. So I think it's really early. I don't know why they're buying them. That does seem a little wacky. But someone told me who sort of works in these circles the other day, is like, the deal, none of the deals make sense. He said, like you made the joke about $1 billion. It's like, no, they just say, well, how much do you want? It's $1 billion. Yeah, whatever. Right. All of a sudden, I guess the billion is now the new million. Right. And it's just weird and arbitrary and capricious. So I guess in a way I'm saying it's less than what you said. Not even sure that it's a strategy. I think it's just a thing. Kostas?
No, I agree. I think it's one. How do I put this? I think it's even less than that, right? Because it's these things are pitched as intelligent on their own and able to aid in drug discovery or development, right? That's kind of how that's fit. But it's that last part. It's aiding, and I think what is being conveyed from a marketing standpoint is that these things can actually develop drugs for you or tell you what to go with. But the reality is they are tools. They are simply tool sets. They are more complicated versions of SAS. Like I mean, bottom line, that's what they do. If you take a look at, I don't know, Roslyn, what does it do? Yes, it has a language component, and that language component stands in the place of a human who has to pull from this database, interpret, and can do it much faster. But that's it. It's essentially it's a way to normalize information from one data set with information from another data set. What you do with that's a whole different story. And I think that the coefficient AI is even worse, because it's an exemplar of these companies that say, like, yes, we can come up with all kinds of options for you, new drugs, new types of drug targets. It's great. Pharma has never had a problem with coming up with targets or the actual rate limiting step is, all right, of this massive library of products that we have, which one is the most likely to survive to inhuman, right? Like that's the critical piece. And so my career started at Janssen, and I did a lot of work in Belgium. And there was this individual who was always around our European office, trying to sell his concept. Where what he had done is he and his research team had gone through the literature and pulled and sort of used their judgment to create what he called an in vitro brain model. So he worked in CNS, and the idea was, if you know how particular drugs bind to dopamine or other parts, other modulators in the brain, you could come up with a theoretical molecule that could mimic or borrow some of the properties of one molecule or another drug molecule. And so the idea was you could just basically say, okay, well, this is our molecule from our library. If we put it in this in vitro theoretical system, what would it do to the brain? What would be the follow-on consequences of giving this? What would the theoretical side effects be, right? So this is I hate to date myself, but I mean this is 25 years ago, right? I mean, and it was the early concept of what we're talking about here. But at the end of the day, it was only so that we could pick models. It was not because we thought that it was going to give us the answer. It was just one more tool, and that's how I see these things. They're tools. They're not an entire solution in and of itself.
I think I'm on similar pages as both of you, but just to clarify for everyone that's listening, when Kostas mentioned SAS, what he's talking about a specific type of software called it's a statistical analysis system, which is sold by a separate company, right? So that's what he referred to as SAS, as opposed to software as a service, right? Which all of us, know that. The headlines all say that AI is basically eating SAS, right? So he was constantly talking about something else.
I was a little confused. I thought I.
Sorry about that, guys.
No,
as someone who's had nightmares of having to code in on the SAS statistical analysis platform. I just figure everybody knows. Everybody had to live with the consequences of that stupid platform. But you know what? The AI is going to eat that platform's lunch because nobody wants to code on that. So like any idiot grad student can now ask complex questions without actually having to understand how to do that coding. But and apologies, I was one of those idiot grad students at one time who just spent hours and hours trying to figure that out. So thanks for the clarification, Lester.
No worries. But actually, it helps with like the segue actually that you mentioned that Kostas. So the next topic, speaking about AI eating SAS, right? Actually, Alex's topic that he brought up is Roche eats the world. So like nice transition there. So appreciate the that point. But maybe Alex, you want to expand on what the specific topic you wanted us to have a conversation about. So over to you, Alex.
Yeah, well, because it's fresh on my mind, I'll talk about a post I just did yesterday, which is about MRD. Roche just had a big diagnostics day. It's like their International Investor Day in London, I think. And you can look at it online if you're interested in 3 hours of that kind of stuff. But there were some interesting slides in there. Roche had just bought a company called Saga, which is a MRD company. And they own Foundation Medicine, and they just announced that Foundation Medicine has started using their own new sequencing platform, which is called Exelios. And they're stitching a lot of things together. And I felt like MRD, which is a super interesting area, is a great example of this. So what they're doing in a way is they appear to be in parallel going after the MRD market, which is probably the biggest growth market right now for NGS, in 3 different ways. They want to, as far as I can tell, sell sequences, ideally to the big people that run these labs. They also have their own lab, Foundation, which is then starting to use their own sequences to deliver their own MRD test, so competing against that other group. And then they bought Saga so that they'll be able to put together kits and ship them anywhere in the world to any lab, not just the centralized lab. So like competing with themselves at 3 different levels. I'm going to sell a central lab a sequencer. I'm going to have to do MRD. I'm going to have my own MRD in my own central lab. And then I'm going to sell kits to do MRD, which will circumvent central labs. And, they have the scale, they have the tools, it's all there theoretically, even spending, I think it was around 600 million to buy Saga. So they're definitely committed to the area, right? They must have spent at least a couple of billion on building Exelios. But it's so interesting to see a large like one of the world's largest companies, really, coming in and sort of, um, for years we've all talked about Illumina competing with itself in different areas or competing with its customers, but this is taking it to a whole new level.
Yeah. It's and just to make this like another piece to add to this maybe very complicated puzzle. Didn't they just announce the acquisition as well? Another acquisition, right? Was it Path AI?
Oh, they did. They just bought Path
Yes.
AI this week, which is not NGS or MRD related. That's my understanding. I only have a simple understanding. Sorry, Kostas, are you very familiar? I'm only somewhat familiar.
Yeah, just somewhat familiar as well. And this goes, I think, along the lines of the what can intelligence provide from a value standpoint, right? I find the reason the value to labs, or the obstacle in a lot of labs, especially if I look at here in Canada, is the pathologist having to sign off on everything, right? I mean, doing interpretations in many labs, because they won't pay for some of the platforms that do the analysis for you, and also having to like write up or sign off on what's the most relevant. Having tools like Path AI available, I think, unlocks that person's time. But again, it comes at a cost, and it's a matter of what institution you're at, and will they be willing to cover it, or how much of it or are they willing to cover. And again, being in Canada, it's always an uphill battle, but I think that does certainly unlock value, which is why the idea of different institutions are going to want to do things differently is why I like Roche's strategy of having sort of a multi-prong approach to trying to drive MRD, right? Which conceptually makes a ton of sense, right? It's just, some institutions, they want to do it in-house. Other institutions don't want anything to do with it. And then, worst case, you have a lot of places like Canada where they don't cover it, so it's out of pocket. So if you want it, you've got to send out of country to have these tests done. So I like that idea of sort of having the menu available for what makes sense in which jurisdiction, because they clearly have a global mindset in terms of rolling this out, as opposed to focusing in a very sort of leading edge market like the US, where you can pick one of these and just go, and you're good to go.
That's a great point. MRD is famously inaccessible outside the US. The big labs, Natera, Guardant, are here. And I was talking to someone, I think in South Korea the other day, and they said, well, MRD is just send out to Natera, to the US, like if you do an MRD test there. And you're absolutely right. It's a weird quirk of the US system that we have LDT, lab developed test rules, where these huge labs can self-certify themselves and don't need FDA approval for what they do. And so that's great for innovation, and it clearly works. But it's not a model that is very replicable, I think, in any other country. And so you're quite right. The Roche model, which is a combination of building kits and shipping the kits, but also now doing more and more centralized cloud informatics, is very powerful. And so that model really could be a global model, because digital PCR instruments, which the kits are the consumable of, are relatively inexpensive and relatively straightforward to use compared to a sequencer. So it kind of fixes that problem. And then the interpretation, which obviously is almost arbitrarily complex now in these complex blood tests, can be easily deployed over the cloud to a local lab. And then the other, economic thing that happens is, again, in the US, as I understand it, if a pathology lab gets an MRD sample and sends it to Natera, Natera gets all the reimbursement for mailing it out, which is understandable. The local lab doesn't get to make any money, right? So it's like, well, send it out. With these, they buy the kits, they'll be able to get reimbursed themselves because they're actually running the tests themselves. And that's good for patients because it brings the testing right near the patient. So the turnaround time. And if you're waiting for waiting from an MRD result, you're sitting on the edge of your seat.
Yeah.
So it appears to have a great advantage for patients. And so I agree with you. It's a great thing. I was thinking about more from a business point of view, which is it's kind of odd if you're in a business in that area, it suddenly feels like, well, I'm going to buy the sequencer from Roche, but I'm competing with Roche, and Roche is trying to displace me. I called the article "Everywhere All at Once," right? It's like, whoa, everywhere I look, all of a sudden there'll be Roche.
Yeah, I think that's the point. Just to be a bit contrarian here, to push back on it. Okay, again, none of this is, I should have said this right in the beginning of our podcast. This is not investing advice. Like we're not advocating you for to sell or buy anything, just so everyone's aware of that. This is just for entertainment and just conversation purposes. But the flip side of it is, I would say one could debate this, but I would say that Roche probably doesn't have the greatest track record with these acquisitions within the NGS space. And one could say that maybe that was because things were too moving too quickly in the past, and maybe a large organization is not the greatest in terms of enabling that type of innovation. Just looking at the, let's say, Foundation Medicine acquisition for, honestly, I forgot how many billions it was, a couple of years, quite 5-6 years back, or even maybe longer now. I think it was actually 2018 that the acquisition was made. They Roche in, I think, 2024 in their annual report actually basically wrote off Foundation Medicine in terms of in terms of goodwill. They said that specifically Roche said that there was no surplus from the estimated future Foundation Medicine revenues to support carrying value of that goodwill, right? Basically, you read into that what you want, but they basically had an impairment of $591 million that they put in, right? So that would be the pushback, is like Roche doesn't necessarily have the greatest track record here.
Well, yeah, that's funny. You gave me an odd idea, which is, well, maybe that explains the whole strategy, which is we'll just make so much spaghetti, we can throw it on all the walls, and maybe one of the bits of spaghetti will stick, right? That's almost what this is. Now I come to think of it. It's like, well, maybe we'll sell sequences to Natera, would be one. Another one would be, well, Foundation Medicine, we kind of screwed it up, but now we're going to have all the right tools so it can have its own great MRD test. Or, hey, we've been making kits for 50 years and selling them. Let's do that as well, right? We'll buy Saga. And so cynically, now I think about it, you could go, no, if you've got the scale, you've got the global sales force, you have all the money, you've got a sequencer now, maybe you do all those things. But Foundation is, in fact, the perfect relevant subject here because it was a therapy selection company. And I have a very simplistic view of it, but it really became almost synonymous with therapy selection. You would do Foundation 1, they would sequence your tumor, you would find out what drugs you should be on. And they owned that business. And it turns out that it's a natural business to then plug MRD into, because that's the next stage of the cancer cycle, right? Which is, well, now you've had your surgery, you've finished your chemo, which Foundation 1 helped your oncologist pick. Now you'll do MRD, right? You've got the relationship with the oncologist. He or she already ordered the CPG test from you. You do the MRD. And then I only noticed this yesterday. I looked at the history a little bit, and Roche never had its own MRD test. It did a deal with Natera. So Roche, I guess, is the channel, but Natera does the actual testing. I mean, they and I assume makes all the money out of it. And I went, well, there's a great example of having an amazing asset that had to innovate, right? That had to get into the MRD business, but everything I assume was there: the channel, the knowledge, the science, the data. I don't know why they didn't do their own MRD. Somebody does.
Yeah. And now the pushback to my own pushback would be it would be what you both talked about, so around the scale. So I guess I could argue that back in the day when the acquisition of Foundation was made, that NGS was still quite novel in a certain way in the clinic. And because of that, even if I had a operational scale, I can take advantage of that because there wasn't something to be able to operationalizable, because everyone had to do like an LDT, let's example, right? Like you had to like make a unique LDT at individual labs. It's just like hard to scale from that perspective. But let's say reimbursement is much more routine, let's say, and much more understandable now over so many years. And if you kit it, and it's the reimbursement is easy to do, and the NGS has definitely gotten easier and easier to do over the years, and then interpretation has like also gotten simpler in a certain type of way because of the various pieces of software and interpretation that's being done, right? Informatics gotten easier from that perspective from, let's say, 2018. That maybe now it's where scale kicks in, that actually the operational efficiency does make sense, right? So I guess that would be the one area I could say, okay, maybe the things are different this time. The proverbial, oh, things are different today, right? So that might be the kind of pushback to my own pushback.
I hope they're different, right? Because if you take a look at the time, Roche, already a leading diagnostic company, buys Foundation Medicine, which at the time was kind of leading edge. Yes, they were trying to do things by the book, especially under Roche. Let's go get everything they kitted and approved. Meanwhile, labs were developing their own tests, getting out there quickly, like basically taking away market share, right? Because it's like, why would we buy your product when we've already got everything and we get 100% of the entire test, right, in house. But on top of that, Roche also had Flatiron. Let's not forget, right? Which the idea was it's a data technology. You go in and you can ask questions, you can guide development. Speaking to what we talked about earlier, you can't create large language models for medicine unless you have good data for them to be trained on, right? And that's was the idea for Flatiron. But here you sit as a multinational pharma with this new forward thinking laboratory testing company, this data company, and you keep everything separate, right? Like you go out of your way not to create synergies between them because you're afraid of what that might look like if there's like ethical backlash or whatever the case may be, just the optics of it, right? So you not only just you strung one arm behind your back, but you're also like on one leg, and you've spent a lot of money. So if Roche decides we're all in, and by the way, we're going to have these things learn from each other and take the best of each other and actually use them and maybe even sort of reinforce what each one is best at, terrific. If it's the same mentality of no, don't rock the boat, don't let those guys do their thing, they're a different business, they don't need to talk to these guys, like that's a different business, they're different franchises, line items, they their own budgets, we're not looking at them, we're not rolling them up from a business standpoint except as it's company X, company Y. They do that, then forget it. Like this is like round 2 of how not to acquire and run innovative companies by a large scale pharma. Like that's my only concern.
Well, I think that's incredibly well said, and I think that's exactly right. I've talked to them quite a bit, and I know one of the themes there when I would talk about potential competition between the groups was that everyone runs independently, right? That Foundation won't use the Roche sequencer unless Foundation likes the Roche sequencer best, right? Better than Illumina, which is inevitably what they're using right now. And then the funny thing is you read between the lines around this Saga acquisition. So here they are literally in the middle of launching their, Roche is launching their NGS platform. Foundation Medicine buys Saga specifically, right? And it's a digital PCR MRD test, which doesn't use NGS except at the start. So they as you would, you make it look good, which is like, well, Roche has its own digital PCR platform, which of course is in another group. So you can go, I mean, they all come together at some point or another in diagnostics or in Roche proper, but you've got a dPCR group, you've got an NGS group, and you've got a Foundation Medicine group. And now Foundation Medicine buys a MRD. Now, Foundation itself has it's so crazy. Foundation itself has a NGS MRD, but they just bought Saga, so they'd have a digital PCR MRD. It's wild. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think just being part of an acquisition in the past, and that's how I actually know of Alex when we got acquired by Illumina back in the day, a laboratory information management system company. It's like integration is hard. That's almost like a superpower. An organization does that super well at some point in time. Like that's a really truly strategic, almost like motive. You can do integrations very very well because like you just I think everyone just here, both Kostas and Alex has talked about it. It's an incredibly hard thing to do to get these different, let's say, egos from different organizations to think alike and complement each other. It is somewhat challenging, and here there is I don't disagree that there's a lot of potential synergy. Is now there's a difference between potential and execution, turning that potential into something that's tangible. So with that said, I want to jump to the next topic. Speaking about the global world that Roche, I think you mentioned it really, really well. That's one of the opportunities that they have, this global reach, right? And it's not just the US. I think this next topic is something that Kostas, you brought up, this whole idea of balkanization of global pharmaceutical markets. That's really centered around this concept called MFN. For those people who are not familiar with MFN, that stands for most favored nation. I'm sure Kostas is going to kind of go into it. So maybe you can explain that next topic for us, Kostas.
Yeah. Let me start by saying that as we sit here, recording, President Trump is in China having negotiations. He brought over, I think it's like 30 CEOs or something like that. Everyone from Elon Musk and Tim Cook to head of Boeing, and the list runs long. What's notably missing from all the industries that he brought along was pharma, right? So the sort of Trump administration, even in the first term, but definitely this term, wanted to reduce the cost of drugs for the American people, which sounds on the face of it makes absolute sense. You want to spend as little as you can to get that reward. But it's funny because it comes from a little bit of a place of feeling, cheated, as with all the other tariff policies, feeling cheated that the rest of the world has taken advantage of the spending that American people and companies put into paying for these drugs, that goes into R&D and that benefits the whole world, but it's disproportionately being funded by the U.S. Right, so that's sort of the sort of the next or genesis for why we're going to try to reduce the prices using this approach. And this approach is that the U.S. must have the lowest price in the world. So in other words, if you can't go to like Romania and give them a lower price, for drug A, because it doesn't matter that they have a lower purchasing power. That's too bad for them. It has to be the same price. The standard model that we've been operating under for decades now has been where you have a global pharma company and it sets sort of price corridors, let's say a high and a low price. The high price goes to countries like Japan, like the US, like Switzerland, even in many cases the UK, places where purchasing power is a lot higher. And so they're able to quote unquote afford that price. But as purchasing power goes down, so do the prices to a certain level, right? So you're trying not to go below that level. If you get below that level, it really becomes a question of, are you giving this away for a particular reason, right? That's worked because it allows you to actually access revenue from all markets. What has happened with this new policy, though, is that you have companies, and I know because I've talked to smaller companies who are looking to license products out, who are in phase 3, looking to bring products to market and trying to figure out launch strategies, who are saying, "Oh my God, I can't go to Europe I can't go to Canada because they'll never give me the US price. So, or at least I'm going to delay and see what happens maybe at the end of this administration. So I'm just going to push off, if I can, going to those markets. So if it's just the small companies, that's one thing. But a couple of weeks ago, during the sort of first quarter call for AZ, their CEO talked about they gave their sort of base case revenue estimates for the year, and then they gave their low, which actually was basically removing all of these lower cost markets. So most of Europe, Canada was out, Australia, New Zealand came out of their models, their revenue models. So imagine that, right? That they're now starting. It was always unspoken, but now it's actually baked into their planning. So consequence one is you may see launches put off or not happen at all. That happens, then we start, I think, and this is sort of my thesis, is we start veering into the model of pharma that existed in before the 90s, right? Where there was a French company, there was an Italian company, there would be a German company, and they'd all kind of parcel Europe up because they're local. They were the local brand, and there would be like benzodiazepines that were in Italy that didn't exist in the UK, or respiratory agents that were in Sweden but didn't exist in Spain, and the US did their own thing entirely, right? And then through mergers, you've got these multinational pharma companies that we have today. But I can see it, and my hypothesis is that if you maintain this requirement, the MFN requirement, and it's got different names depending on, is it for Part B in the US, if it's for Medicare, if it's for Medicaid. It comes in different names, but the concept is the same. If you maintain this, you're going to give incentives for smaller companies, local companies, to start filling the gap, right, with similar agents, right? We always talk about these products that basically have no differentiation, but they're just a different molecule, right? But if that's what it takes to fill the gap in Europe versus the US, then that's what you're going to start to see. But sort of my ultimate evolution of this hypothesis, though, is that you can have a opportunity for a very large comparator to come in and take all of these markets, or start to fill the need of all of these markets. And that comparator could be China, right? And my vision is that you see, similar to what happened with the electric vehicles, China is already putting a push behind drug discovery. Most of these products are being partnered out with large pharma. Hengrui, who's like a huge development company, is, I think, BMS earlier this week had signed a deal with them for a bunch of their products. So that's sort of what I see evolving, is that companies like Hengrui end up becoming the BYD of pharma and start expanding out of China, actually taking products into the clinic and actually going into Europe, Australasia, and then from there, the ultimate will be an entry into the US market at some point, and basically having at least one, if not several, large competitive Chinese pharmas that basically exist because we've created this sort of balkanized model of drug approvals. Sorry, that was a long introduction, but
no, that was super interesting.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, because you've thought about it a lot, and just some naive questions. The first one is, I didn't understand why the drug companies would not sell anywhere else, because I would have thought what they would do is go, okay, US is big, maybe the biggest market. I'll set a price for selling the drug in the US. I can't sell it cheaper anywhere else. So I'll still at least offer it there. It won't be priced right for that market. It'll be overpriced for that market. I would thought they'd just do that and accept the fact that they would sell less volume, but they'd get higher prices because it's the only way they would get it. But wouldn't they do
It depends
that?
on the market. Yeah, it depends on the market. Some markets you just can't access it if it's not on the public market. or a company like Germany, where it's kind of a mix of public and private. I mean, you do have private insurers, but it's the public, um, it's the IQWIG, which represents the public purse, actually doing the negotiation, implemented by private
But you're saying they
insurers.
would just refuse it. They would say, "Hey,
Yeah,
this thing's $100 in the US. It used to be $50 here. It's now got to be 100. We just don't want your drug." They would
yeah,
just block it and go, "It's unacceptable."
yeah,
And then I
yeah.
thought, well, an easy runaround, assumedly, because every international rule is meant to be run around, apparently, would be for, let's say it's Pfizer, just to license it to your point, a smaller regional company, because I don't know if they're blocked from licensing the IP, but they could just go, well, here's, give me a royalty and you go make it.
So when I spoke to some of the CEOs, here's what they said. I'm not willing to sign my name to the fact that there is no other market that is selling this product at a lower price, because they become culpable
Oh,
they have a legal risk. So
yeah.
that's what's really preventing, because their lawyers are like, no, because
Yeah, no,
the
no.
way we addressed this in the past, and Canada is a great example of it. You come to Canada with this price that is, okay, maybe not the US price, but it's still pretty high,
Pricey.
and
Yeah.
the provinces look at that price and they go, "There is absolutely no way we are paying that. What do you think? I made a money? Like, I don't have a money
Mm,
tray out back for your
mhm,
product here."
mhm.
So you negotiate a confidential rebate, right? So nobody sees this. It doesn't impact anybody else's market, but it's a negotiated agreement between what is the company willing to give up versus what is the government willing to pay, right? And
Yep,
it's
yep,
it's a true negotiation. Nobody likes it, I can tell you that. Neither
yep,
side really likes it, but
yep.
at
It
least
worked.
something happens and the patients get access to the
Yeah,
meds, right?
yeah.
That works because it doesn't sway what price in another market this product ends up getting, right? It's just based on what works here and no one else needs to know. But apparently, those confidential negotiations
Mhm.
are considered under that agreement, even though there is no way in law that you would be compelled to
Yeah,
disclose it because you
but it's
sign a
not worth going
confidentiality agreement,
to
right?
jail for. Yeah, yeah.
So it's the
Okay.
uncertainty that really is causing a
Interesting.
lot of these executives to say, like, I don't want to put myself in legal jeopardy. This
Mhm,
is too much stress
mhm,
for me and
mhm,
for my board
mhm.
and my shareholders. I'm not doing this.
Very interesting. Wow.
Maybe the question here, just to connect it to the broader, maybe global kind of conversation, is this idea of deglobalization, right? This idea that globalization, that was a 2000s to like 2020 thing, right? Where we centralize, all about efficiency. And now there's this idea of deglobalization, which is this idea of like each country kind of having their own infrastructure. It's all about redundancy, security, right?
Yeah.
And the like. So maybe to have a slightly change to that question is, the like does this MFN outlive this current administration, right? Or does it actually is part of the ethos moving forward? Because deglobalization is, many would argue, part of the equation now moving forward. That structurally it's baked into the cake now, right?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, what maybe start with you first, Alex. Like what do you think? Does this is this one of those things that will just outlive this administration as well? So it's just baked into the cake. So like you can't get away from MFN moving forward.
Phew. It's a great question. I feel very unqualified to comment, but that won't stop me commenting. Um, I think from a US perspective, Trump pretty much has put his stamp on the Republican Party. So let's assume that it would just go ahead with a Republican administration. Um, I'm guessing from a Democrat's point of view, it would get supported because it's a pro accessibility argument for the U.S. It's a Democrats don't want to be come to think of it, it's the last thing Democrats want to do is to become the company of Big Pharma, right? And go, oh yeah, we're worried about the profit margins.
Too late.
Well, yeah, they can't publicly be seen to be doing this. So I think they're going to have to support it but then I think that example you gave, Kostas, of rebates, there's appearances and there's reality. But I do think it's other than traditional lobbying and money, which is important. I don't see much motivation for the Democrats to do it, because I think what happened was this wacky U.S. paying a lot more and going down. I'm going to say it happened by accident, but it didn't happen by legislation, right? It's assumedly some free market economics that worked out pretty well. And it definitely worked in the favor of the drug companies. But I think in general in the US, from both parties, the sense would be that it disadvantaged the US. And clearly, the US pays roughly double what most other Western nations pay in terms of GDP. And that's everyone knows it and everyone's always trying to solve it. And if this is at least, not saying this solves it, but at least if it's seen to ease it or potentially ease it, it's going to get support from both parties.
Yeah. I have to say, I think there's a good middle ground. Like if they let me loose on it and said, like, how would you change this? Because for American pharma companies, if they do lose those markets, that's 40 to 60% of total global revenues if nothing is done, right? I'd say actually they should have it shouldn't be most favored nation. It should be most favored customer. Domestically in the US, because the dirty secret is that Medicare pays more than most insurance companies, right? The rebates that go to insurance companies in the US, again, these are all confidential. Nobody sees them. They go to multiple people within the value chain. It's typically less than.
Well, Medicare's not allowed to negotiate, right?
They're not allowed to negotiate. Yeah.
Insanity.
So just make if the government is paying, make that the have to be the lowest price in domestically, and then let the rest of the world figure it out. That way it solves everybody's problems. You want to pay less? Great. You have people in your own market who are paying less. Forget about what Romania is doing. Based on this example. Worry about what Aetna is getting as opposed to this giant customer called Medicare. So that's how I would say.
Kostas for president. Kostas for president.
There we go.
Yes, I think none of us here could be president. Actually, right? I think there's like 2 Canadians and then an Australian, right? So I actually don't think that's even in the cards for us here. But not to say any of us would want to do that either, given the I assume it's a huge burden and headache.
Kostas could be head of Secretary of HHS. Then
there we go.
You don't have to be native born for that. Maybe a citizen, but I'm not even sure about that.
Listen, the FDA opened up.
Couldn't get any worse.
FDA. Yeah, right.
I was going to say, the FDA, there's a rule potentially opened up at FDA.
Yeah, so FDA's got a slot. Nice.
But hey, with that said, thank you very much. I I told the guys here that I have to jump off, have a little arrangement I have to get to right after this. So apologies for cutting this a little bit short, but this is, first time we're trying this, having a panel conversation about the hot topics in the life sciences, so it's biotech, healthcare, Canadian view, Aussie view, and obviously you cannot talk about biotech and healthcare without talking about the U.S. So it's somewhat U.S. Centric as well from that perspective. So do comment down below if you like the conversation, like and subscribe. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to comment below in the YouTube comments. So again, thanks a lot, Alex, for jumping on here. Hopefully we do this more often.
Enjoyed it. Thanks, guys. Thanks both of you.
Appreciate it. Thanks again, Kostas.